From the moment it was first announced, Fallout 76 had gamers on edge, but it was still shocking to see just how poorly the game was received upon release. The backlash has been extreme, from fans and critics both. What happened to make this ambitious installment in the Fallout series such a nuclear bomb? Well, a lot. Let's break down the many failures of Fallout 76. Rule number 1 for anyone attempting to launch an online game is to make sure the servers work. Over and over again, high-profile game releases have had disastrous launch weeks thanks to servers that can't deal with a world's worth of players trying to log in at once. These release weeks can be brutal for even the most experienced developers. It's a challenge that should be anticipated, and Bethesda dropped the ball. Upon the game's release, Fallout 76 was plagued with server disconnection issues, with new players getting randomly booted from the game without recourse. Bethesda did eventually issue patches for the problem, but the server meltdowns made a poor first impression on people who were already feeling uneasy about the all-new, always-online Fallout. Some of Fallout 76's server issues were uniquely frustrating. At one point during the launch week, Bethesda yanked down the servers for around 3 hours without warning, inviting even more backlash from players who then wasted time trying to reconnect. When the game was working again, some high-level players messed around with the game's nuke system, launching 3 bombs at once at the same spot. In an amusing twist, that onslaught reportedly resulted in a crash of the game's servers. At least that crash feels appropriate.
Dropping bombs, right?
The post-apocalyptic landscape that players explore in Fallout 76 is shockingly true to life in its emptiness. There is genuinely very little to do or see. Thanks to the sheer size of the game's wilds of West Virginia, it's not common to see other players around you in the game. Most of your time is probably spent exploring by yourself, just like previous Fallout experiences. The problem is that Fallout 76 was clearly designed with multiplayer gaming in mind. It just doesn't have enough content to satisfy a solo adventurer. There's a lot of traveling from point A to point B and killing things along the way, but there's not really any narrative motivation behind any of it. While that storytelling void could potentially be filled by interactions with other players, those sort of encounters just don't happen that often.
I'm lonely.
The map for Fallout 76 is huge, but it only allows a couple of dozen players to coexist at the same time. Apparently, Bethesda didn't want their wasteland to come off like an overpopulated party zone, but they went too far in the other direction, creating a lifeless feeling world with not much to do in it. The result is a wasteland simulator that's probably a little too accurate. Base building has never been the Fallout series' strongest suit. Fallout 4's version of the game mechanic was plodding, tedious, and divisive at best. Some people liked it, but it seems that most didn't, which makes it all the more strange that Bethesda doubled down on more base building in Fallout 76. Did they at least improve on the experience? No, they did not. Instead, the base building system is one of the game's biggest sources of frustration. At launch, players' stash limits for their inventories were horrifically low, forcing players into constant, tedious micromanagement of their resources if they wanted to get anything done. Players were so vocal about their frustrations that Bethesda quickly apologized, promising to increase the limit as soon as possible. It's a step in the right direction, but as far as review scores and first impressions are concerned, the damage has been done.
This game sucks.
The Vault-Tec Assisted Targeting System, or V.A.T.S, has been a part of Fallout's gameplay since Fallout 3, and has roots going back to the very beginning of the series, but the mechanic just doesn't work in 76. As originally designed, the popular system allows players to pause time during combat and target specific parts of enemies for attacks. Players could then watch their battle plans unfold in glorious slow motion, taking apart enemies with satisfying brutality. But because Fallout 76 is always online, it's completely impossible to pause the game. The restriction results in V.A.T.S being more of an auto-targeted system that's often more useful for spotting enemies than for actually hitting them. The changes make for a combat system that's V.A.T in name only. What used to be involved and exciting is now remarkably disengaging and hugely disappointing, serving mostly to remind players of how fun this series used to be. Multiplayer is good for two things: cooperation and conflict. While Bethesda made sure to inform gamers that player versus player wouldn't be a huge part of Fallout 76, people still expected more than what the game delivered. In its launch iteration, initiating a PvP encounter is a clunky experience for everyone involved, with players being forced to attack each other repeatedly before a fight will even start. So don't expect any thrilling ambushes. After the fight, the losing player respawns safely nearby, having lost nothing except time and a little dignity. It's so low stakes and unexciting that it's worth wondering why Bethesda even bothered including it at all. The developer reportedly intends to update the PvP system in the future, but as with a lot of the game's problems, those promises don't forgive the sorry state of things at launch. Game-breaking glitches in Fallout have been relatively acceptable in the past because of the game's single-player nature. If the game screwed up in a way that impeded progress, your most recent save file would, well, save you. But glitches are another thing entirely in an online game with no save system to speak of. Where once gamers could rely on a trigger-happy autosave system to bring them back from encounters with even the worst bugs, Fallout 76 no longer offers that failsafe. Thanks to the player's inability to save their progress, any game-derailing glitches can cause players to lose a significant amount of time and progress. Without being able to hit a simple reset, players who experience quest-breaking glitches are forced to log out of the game completely when they need to try again. Maybe that doesn't seem like the biggest deal if it happens once or twice during an entire playthrough, but Fallout 76's launch was pretty glitchy, testing players' patience and pushing many to the breaking point. All the lost time adds up, considerably souring the experience. It's just another way in which the game takes away something players used to have control over, and it's a surprisingly big factor in why Fallout 76's launch was so disappointing. Bethesda is a name that's long been associated with great storytelling, but Fallout 76 puts that reputation to the test. The company has produced titles that challenge our understanding of how to tell a narrative in video games, whether they be sprawling fantasy epics of the Elder Scrolls or the sci-fi mind-bender of Fallout 4. They've also filled their games with interesting atmosphere, emergent stories, and one-off quests that can resonate with players even more than a game's main storyline. Good stories are kind of the developer's thing at this point, which is why Fallout 76's frankly boring narrative feels so inexcusable. The game was heavily criticized at launch for featuring next to no reason for players to explore its world. It's another problem that can be traced back to the multiplayer aspect. Rather than having the weight of the world on their shoulders, players in Fallout 76 feel more like errand runners in a world that doesn't really need them. The inability to meaningfully affect the fate of West Virginia takes away the sense of agency typically present in Fallout games. The result is a narrative that's almost entirely based around people who died hundreds of years ago, whom the player will never meet. Instead, players only really interact with scarce robots, who point players in the direction of holotapes and records that show them what happened during the 200-year-old Great War. It's an alienating decision and a terrible narrative device, keeping the player completely disconnected from the events that make the world interesting.
I'm bored.
Back in the days of dial-up internet, downloading digital copies of games would be pretty much impossible. The games would simply be too big and take too long to download. For most people, this hasn't been a problem for years, but Bethesda tested players' patience on their internet connections with its gigantic downloads for Fallout 76. Between the base game and its multiple patches, Fallout 76 was weighing in at about 150 gigabytes within a month of its launch. For internet users with monthly limits on how much bandwidth they have access to, the result was a game too big to download. Some players ended up locked out of the game they had paid for until their next billing cycle. Obviously, not all of that is Bethesda's fault, with other recent games like Red Dead Redemption 2 also sporting eye-popping bandwidth requirements. But Bethesda made things worse by releasing massive patches for the game that were as big as 50 gigs. The result is a major headache and a big-time turn-off to gamers who might see such a massive bandwidth commitment as a frustrating final straw. Fallout games have a way of making their players feel smart, but Fallout 76 is making it happen for all the wrong reasons. Essentially, the enemies in this game are dumb, even by radioactive zombie standards. There's also not much variation to them, which means players quickly start to feel as if they're having the same stupid encounter over and over again. In Fallout 76, too many enemies fall into one of two categories. The first type of enemy is a kind of dimwit kamikaze, charging into battle with no strategy directly into players' line of fire. The second type of enemy is an ineffective coward, hiding behind cover and then occasionally firing into the air. And that's honestly it. During the game's launch window at least, those are the only two types of battles players could expect out of the game. Even worse, the glitchy enemies have plenty of problems navigating the game's environment, getting stuck in place, glitching into the air, or just getting stuck behind things. Video games left this kind of bad AI in the past, so the sorry state of things in Fallout 76 just feels inexcusable. We're used to seeing ambitious projects from Bethesda, but their new direction for Fallout seems to have totally missed the mark. It's more than just lousy execution. The game also just feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. One thing Fallout 76 can't decide on is how essential the multiplayer aspect is. Many of the game's quests are easy to complete without other players, but lack the narrative depth that makes a solo experience interesting. The multiplayer feels superficial, with PvP being pretty irrelevant and group quests being frustrating experiences thanks to certain server disconnects, a bad combat system, and more. There are survival elements to the game as well, but they're pretty basic stuff, and feel irrelevant in a game with a free fast travel system. The end game is also uninspiring, lacking a clear goal for players to go out and achieve. The game becomes mechanical. You go out and loot treasure from high-level enemies until you have no more room in your bags. Then you go back to your base to store your loot, occasionally crafting something with your spoils, and then you rinse and repeat. The game quickly makes you feel like there's nowhere to go, nothing to do, and little to see. There isn't even a major hub for players to gather and interact with each other. The experience is just sad. At its core, Fallout 76 bombed with audiences because it tried to be all things to all people, and ended up satisfying nobody. It's big, it's broad, and it's broken. Ambition is great, and it's not necessarily bad that Bethesda wanted to try something new, but execution matters. Games are about having fun, and that's one thing Fallout 76 isn't. Its nightmare launch is already the stuff of legend, and we're not sure if Bethesda can fix these problems after the fact. And even if they could, it's possible frustrated players may not care. The damage is done. Now we're all stuck living with the no-good toxic Fallout.